Howdy y'all. I want to talk about the brambly path in navigating those thorny, sticky, tricky little situations that involve emotions and maybe the stories that you play out. So the brambly path is the path when you're venturing into emotional territory that is maybe a little foreign, maybe a little scary. There's no roadmap for saying how to best navigate the path as if it's protected on both sides by some swing rope where it's like you're going to be safe if you just stay on the path, and you can kind of navigate your way through to safety or something like that. I can tell you what most definitely is outdated in the way that we usually respond to these brambly situations. And especially if you're a man or masculine, this template is what doesn't work. It's the outdated template, we call it the checklist, of solving problems. Huge thing that most men react to emotions. We try to solve problems thinking that if there's an emotion, there's a problem to solve. We don't want to do that, even though it's like I'm checking the box. This is like the don't do list. Definitely mitigate emotions. We definitely don't want to do that. We tend to shut down, repress others around us, make them feel less. We don't want to do that. We definitely don't want to be right. There's a huge difference versus being right versus being loved. If you're trying to be right, then you're always going to be right because you're convinced that it's dual like that, right and wrong. Everyone's right and everyone's wrong. So you definitely don't want to solve problems. You definitely don't want to try to minimize and mitigate emotions. And we definitely don't want to try to be right. This is our don't do for anyone that's just looking at this visually. Don't do those things. Oh, and we definitely don't want to avoid expression. I tend to assume a role in sticky emotional situations where I put a barrier between me and my emotion. So if this is a little cowboy Kev that doesn't wear a cowboy hat but wears a Team Zissou hat, this is cowboy Kev, vest and all, nice pair of Wranglers, love Wranglers. I put a barrier between me and my emotion. So everything just bounces off this wall and goes right back into my intellect. I tend to venture up, whereas we're really being asked to venture down into the heart. So we definitely don't want to avoid our expression. It's really difficult as a man because we tend to be the space holder, we tend to be the ground, the rock, the foundation, but we sacrifice being that big foundation, being that sturdy foundation, and expressing ourselves. So these are the things that we don't want to do. So if we're talking about it in terms of navigating this path that's littered with scary bramble, that was a specific word that was asked in a question. And I love that word in particular. I think the language is so powerful, and I think there's a lot of beauty I want to pull out of that word. So if we are knowing that we're having to engage this really sticky situation, it's a path and it just seems like it's all bramble and thorny and sticky and it's just painful. And it's like, how are we going to navigate it? Where are my little guide ropes? Well, the first thing that we can do is we can be okay, or we can drop trying to avoid the bramble. If there's one thing that's inevitable, is there's going to have to be pain. It's not bad. Pain's physical. I don't want to call it suffering either. Let's call this hurt, actually. There's going to be hurt. There's going to be experiences of pain and emotional hurt that are unavoidable. So we can rule out trying to avoid them at the beginning. There's going to be a sticky situation, and we have to be okay with this. If we're not okay with that, then you can just use the outdated template up here, and you can see where that gets you. Now, I'm not saying this to say, like, be all nihilistic and nothing matters. It's okay. Like, I'm just going to be hurt all the time. I'm not saying loop into that story. But step one, if you have the self, the person who asks this question has clearly, like, a high level of self-awareness because they know when they're engaging in these emotional situations or when they're present. So if you have that level of awareness where you realize this is thorny, how do I navigate this? We just first have to check in and say, like, am I okay to be hurt? Or is it, can I be okay with being hurt? Because there's no way that you can go through this path meaningfully without accepting that. You can go through and avoid, but you're only going to save yourself in that matter. Chances are, if this is an emotional situation, it involves more than two people. Or more than one person, let's say two. Maybe three, maybe four, maybe it's a family or whatever it is. So you can avoid getting hurt at the expense where you'll probably be the one who's right. Is that fair to say? Where if I wanted to get through this path without hitting all this thorny bramble, I would avoid it and I'd end up being right, and I probably wouldn't feel many of my emotions other than just that primal fight or flight. Well, it's not even emotion, but the emotions that come out of that nervous system state. So first, we just got to be okay with being hurt. And second, we just have to get onto the path. We have to really feel what it's like on the path, and then we have to be okay to fully express ourselves. This doesn't mean expressing your emotions into something physical that can maybe lead to, a situation that then is beyond just the emotions. But especially for men, when we engage in these really sticky situations on this brambly path, we tend to shut off, or we don't express the fullness of our humanity. So when we shut off expressing our emotions and our humanity, it makes it very hard to relate, and it makes it very hard to be related to, because then we're bringing our intellect to an emotional fight, like the proverbial knife to a gunfight. You don't want to be the one who brings the brain to the heart, or you don't want to be the one who brings the intellect, the brain, to the table where everyone's pouring out their heart and their soul and their emotions. So we have to be okay expressing our humanity, and that can feel really uncomfortable. There's formats where you can learn how to communicate this in a way that feels really awkward but helpful. Do like nonviolent communication. I don't remember the author of that book, but that's a great resource. I suck at those frameworks, but I try when my partner and I are maybe navigating a gnarly miscommunication or something like that. Be okay expressing your humanity, because what is being asked of you is to meet the circumstance. And the part of you that doesn't want to meet the circumstance is the part of you that has to step aside and let the emotions come. Because the brain is really powerful where we can keep ourselves from engaging emotionally with something. We kind of shut off from, the chin down. So we can meet the circumstance, express our humanity, and be okay with the potential of being hurt. Because what's being asked of us when we meet the circumstance is emotions here. The stickiness, the thorniness is here. Pain is probably inevitable. The only way I'm going to navigate this path is if I meet this path in what it's asking me to bring, which is all of me, all of my emotions. And so God, so be it if I get stuck in the middle of that path, well, at least I open to it and I express myself. But I would second that there's nothing you've been through. I'm not going to write it down. There's nothing you've been through that you haven't gotten through. So as much as this might scare the shit out of you, if you're being presented with a really brambly emotional situation, then chances are it's a great conglomeration of all of the stuff that you feel you're not ready to look at, but life is telling you, like, hey, I think you need to look at this, and I think you are ready. I think there's also that kind of communication with life where it is provoking, but it's also really sincere and gentle at the same time. It's a calling forth. So We have to engage this path without trying to avoid it. And we have to engage the path without being committed to getting anywhere in particular. You know, this is a big question mark, you know. Oh, that's an awful looking question mark. That's like a scythe. We have to let go of getting anywhere. We have to let go of having our way in the conversation or arriving at a certain place. Now, I don't have any context to how this issue translates, but if you can identify where you might loop into these things, doesn't matter who you are. I mentioned men, but this is what we struggle with a lot. Wherever you start to loop into maybe these mechanisms, you can allow yourself to slowly feel safe to drop each one of them and just meet the bramble where it is. And the beauty about the bramble, which is why I love that he said this, is there's berries that grow on the bramble. But the only way you can get into you can get the berries is by going into the bramble. So I think it's a great representation of the fact that there's always something sweet that awaits us when we allow ourselves to embrace this full humanity and to meet the circumstance. There's a reward. I live around a lot of blackberry and raspberry, and I'll try my best by putting on, I have a big jumpsuit, and you get in there, but I still come back with scrapes and stuff, but I'll have a bucket full of raspberries. It's like, I have to be okay with being hurt in order to get the sweetness and the splendor of what that situation can offer me. So I find it really fascinating. This is the word that this man used, was bramble, when bramble is like a fruit-bearing bush that has thorns. I think that's a great analogy for illustrating, yeah, it's thorny, yeah, it's shitty, yeah, it sucks. Yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty. I guess that's another thing. Kind of tied into meeting circumstance. But I have to embrace uncertainty because I don't know. I have no clue. So there's no sense in trying to know. Embrace the uncertainty and then be surprised by like, wow, there's literally berries growing everywhere. So for what it's worth, it's hard to speak into a situation like this that doesn't have context. But this is certainly what not to do. This is a guideline for maybe what you can do. Doesn't mean it's what you need to do. But these are certainly much better qualities to enter a really prickly emotional conversation or story or situation than maybe these things. So for what that's worth, hope it helped. And yeah, let me know any other topics you want spoken on. I'm not a guru by any means, but I love being able to see what comes up for me when I start talking about this. Because I don't have any of this planned, by the way. It just kind of comes out, which is cool for me to see too. So thanks, everybody. Ciao.